Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry for the late start, had a little bit of technical difficulties, but thank you for joining us today for the Navigating the Path to a $15 Minimum Wage webinar. Before we get started, I'm going to read a quick disclaimer. The information provided here is for educational purposes, and FRLA does not warrant or endorse any particular provider. FRLA is prohibited from providing specific legal, financial, or accounting advice, and the information represented here is not intended as such. FRLA encourages businesses to consult qualified, competent advisors in these fields to explore their specific situations. This webinar is being recorded for future use by the association and other industry members. Your participation in the call is deemed to be your consent to the recording. And so with that, we wanted to share a few housekeeping items. The NRA released the State of the Restaurant Industry Report. This is normally a $150 report that is free to members and non-member restaurant owners and operators. I'll include this in the recap that I send out to all registered attendees after the webinar. We also wanted to share that the FRLA minimum wage website is up. So if you need more information on what this increase is, you can check out this chart and the website. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, and I'd like to hand it over to Bryce Woodyard.
Thank you, Ashley. So I guess we'll get right into it. We've got Rick Warner on the call and Dave Reed as well. And Dave right now is currently doing some consulting, or he's COO consulting for a Los Angeles-based restaurant group. So much so that he actually skipped his flight so he could be on this webinar. So hopefully we can provide some good information for you. Want to go to the next slide. Next one. Perfect. Okay, so about FTR, we're a full-service restaurant consulting, accounting, and technology company. Offer support center services, and that goes from software implementations all the way up to full outsourcing. But we can, really customize, whatever solution you need and give you a free support center assessment. And we're based out of Tampa, Florida, but have offices elsewhere. Next slide. Okay, so the basics of the law, just to keep it pretty simple, in September, the minimum wage goes up to $10, and the tip wage goes up to $6.98. And then that just scales up by $1 each year until we get to 2026. In general, just subtract $3.02 from the minimum wage, and that's how you get to the tip wage. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of get into some lessons. We've got a lot of Los Angeles-based restaurant groups that we work with, and a lot of that is the result of the minimum wage increase that they saw a couple years ago. So they're on the same path as Florida. They're just at $13.50 right now, and they're eventually getting up to $15 an hour, I believe, by 2022. So, the big piece of this presentation is to just kind of share with you some of the issues that we've seen and some of the considerations that we've seen from our LA-based restaurant groups and San Francisco-based restaurant groups, to kind of give you an idea of the struggles that they went through. We'll go to the next slide. Here, I'll kind of kick it over to Dave, but the big question up front is, obviously your wages are increasing, this first year by 30%. So, the biggest question is, okay, do I raise prices? When do I raise prices? And how do I raise them? And so I'll kind of turn it over to Dave and kind of let you talk about some of the things that you've done at your restaurant group, some of the things you've done in the past, and just some considerations there.
Well, thank you, Bryce. I'm a Florida guy and certainly have been fighting the fight with most of you in Florida on minimum wage. Pretty shocking to come out here last February. I've been here for a year now in LA, and walk into then $13 an hour, going up $1 every year, 14 this year, 15 next year. And then if you don't know, the individual cities around California even have higher wages. Sunnyvale is over $16 an hour minimum wage. Cupertino is right at 16. So, 15 is becoming just the base. But to Bryce's point, you have this pandemic where we had to let a lot of people go, and a lot of you did also. It's a true tragedy. And we just got our patios back a week ago. So we've been nothing but third party for several months. It's ebbed and flowed over the year. And just yesterday, we had a meeting about how many people can we afford to rehire. But let me just back up a little bit. The history of this company that we are consulting right now shows that they had to take a significant price increase when the minimum wage skyrocketed a couple of years ago. And the data shows, as we look back, that there was a direct correlation, empirical data, of as the minimum wage grew and price grew, foot traffic went down drastically. The net cause of the minimum wage increase causing the owners of this business here in LA to raise their prices almost crushed this business. And to this day, even though we took price back when Governor Newsom shut the city down on March the 15th, when you read social media, and this is a 30-year-old Los Angeles business that we're out here consulting. But when you read social media, if there's one thing that you see, it's you're too expensive. And we have taken a couple of bucks off the average entree price over the last 6-7 months. And so it's a real challenge when a business has to incrementally raise its prices with this enforced minimum wage, or that's happening around the country and happening to all of you also. So what do? You look everywhere you can to cut. And at least in the case of this business, we can't afford to rehire the number of people that we normally would. And at the same time, we're looking at every tech option that we can find to offset the minimum wage. And I think a lot of other people are also. And I know that's a field that FTR specializes in and can really help you.
Thanks, Dave. And to kind of add some color too behind that, Dave's experience out there too is that, the brand itself, the price increase that they took was we're going to increase menu prices across the board by this much. And we've got another brand, and unfortunately that person couldn't make it there, but they took a different approach where they strategically targeted different items to increase the price, as opposed to saying we're going to take this blanket 10% increase. And then the other thing that we found, we probably have about 60 to 70 locations that we track in California, is that the price sensitivity depended on the region that you're in. So obviously the touristy region is less price sensitive than you're more of your local markets. And so part of the approach, if you're a multi-unit restaurant group, is to potentially look at maybe I take price over here, but I don't take price over here, sort of a tiered pricing structure. And I know Dave, when he took pricing this past year, I think it was more of a measured, targeted approach on, okay, where do you take your bucks off and where do you add over here? And I know, Dave, you looked at also adding kind of some appetizers and other things to increase the check average too, not just taking price.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that's just survival of the fittest. And I think that chances are everybody on this phone call is taking the same measures, but it's a scary notion. Where will this stop? And then, well, actually, if you look at the history of California, and again, I'm used to Florida, 865 and the amendment that was just passed. Unfortunately, it goes to 10 and then up. You know, it happened out here pretty quick. And boy, you know, you can't help but notice and listen to the data. I'm sure even those of you that are in Florida or wherever you might be right now listening to this, people are fleeing California. Elon Musk, gone. Joe Rogan, gone. Ben Shapiro, gone. And, you know, if you listen to any of those people, they speak of this, that the blue state is chasing people out of here, because it's not just minimum wage, it's unbelievable taxes, unbelievable regulation. It's becoming a real battleground for businesses to survive. And then, you know, the mandate of, you know, shutting the city down and looking out my window, 12 million people that have been with stay-at-home orders, you know, for the better part of a year. The minimum wage is a very, very difficult thing to navigate.
Hey, Ashley, if you want to go to the next slide, and I'll kind of turn it over to, thanks, Dave, and I'll kind of turn it over to Rick here. So another strategy that we saw out in California and even Arizona is the surcharge added to the bill. You know, and this is just an example here that we included on the slide of, you know, hey, we're adding a 4% surcharge, you know, to the check, and you can kind of see it too. It's, you know, some people call it the benefit surcharge, some people call it the health insurance surcharge, and some people call it the minimum wage surcharge. But Rick, I'll kind of turn it over to you to kind of talk about that, and, you know, whether that's something you want to consider.
Yeah, and we saw some of this in a couple of years ago in Seattle and San Francisco, which were the first kind of proving grounds for the fight for 15 and the, you know, the $15 wage. And yeah, there's a bunch of backlash on the consumer side, and it's a, you know, again, it's the same consumer mindset that allowed people to not understand that by pushing for a $15 minimum wage, in effect, you end up hurting the people that you're trying to help, and you're cutting off those bottom rungs of the opportunity ladder, those starter jobs. But you know, the public perception of that is, there's been a lot of restaurants gotten backlash from just saying, oh, we're just going to pass it on. In other words, so you won't pay your people, so you're just going to, you know, make us pay your people more. And it's just a potential bad move. If you do need to do that kind of surcharge and communicate it, you have to be very, very careful how it's being communicated so that you don't end up shooting yourself in the foot from a publicity and image standpoint. Dave, do you want to comment on what you've seen with that out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, any opportunity to pass any of this mandated insurance coverage, et cetera, you're going to see, because they just don't have the EBITDA to survive if they don't pass this on. You know, I mean, the other thing in California, if you don't know, is that we don't have any tip credit. So imagine your business, especially if you're in Florida and you lose that tip credit. Now you're at $15 an hour. It's a wrecking ball on the P&L. So yeah, I mean, you're looking everywhere that you can to try to find a penny, and ultimately it's going to get passed on to the consumer if these businesses are going to survive. I mean, you just can't, you know, you can't go from a $12 hamburger to a $20 hamburger, or in our case, a $12 Mongolian beef to a $20 Mongolian beef. The consumer just does not accept it. It will come pow.
Right, Ashley, next slide. Thanks, Dave and Rick. So with that, you know, one of the things that we've really seen in California and Arizona across the board is the need for kind of more sophisticated labor reporting. You know, obviously the POS system gives you a good idea, but, you know, do you track on a daily basis, year-over-year labor? You know, do you have kind of that warehouse where you can go back in time and just do a quick comparison of labor? And are you using a scheduling tool, you know, that when the minimum wage comes, it's going to be all the more vital to actually be able to compare labor over time. And, you know, there's a lot of groups that we, you know, if we're going to compare a difference between some California groups that we see and some Florida groups, is the reporting sophistication on the California groups has had to increase so that they can better control labor. And so that's a big thing that, that's, if you're just looking at your numbers on the POS system and you're not really using your, accounting software like a middleware product like a Compete or a C2It or a Restaurant 365 or fully utilizing hot schedules, a product like that, then we strongly recommend that, because, leading up to this minimum wage increase and going through it, a lot of your time will be pivoted towards, okay, can I move the host down from 6 hours to 4 hours, or can I maybe even go, get rid of the host altogether? How many servers do I need? Last year I ran 5. Can I get away with 4? Just like Dave's doing right now. Okay, how many people can we afford to rehire? I mean, the more data you have surrounding that, the better decision you can make. And so there's a lot of software out there, but the key really is on the software is, are you actually going to use it? One, and two, can you get it implemented, and can you get the buy-in from your operations team? Because you can, give somebody the best software product in the world, but if you're not going to use it and you're not bought in, then it's not going to work. So that's kind of the key there. And a lot of the, especially for the multi-unit brands, just being able to benchmark across stores and say, hey, my Orlando store does, 3 million in sales and 20% labor, and my Tampa store does the same sales, but it's 25% labor. Why is that? Asking those questions and kind of learning the best practices from your other locations really helps. Next slide. And kind of with that, some other areas of improvement, you heard Dave mention earlier, you can't just take price and you can't just cut labor, right? And so where else do you turn? And so there's a lot of kind of G&A reduction items, just things that, you may not have considered before that you're going to have to review and look over. Do you have the right mix of people in your support center, your back office? And then, is your technology stack streamlined, or do you have a collection of pieces that kind of talk to each other, that maybe talk to each other, or do they all talk well together? That's a big piece in all this. And then also, given the, importance of delivery and pickup now and third parties, something that we see, especially for high volume restaurants, using like a third party aggregator, like a Chowly or some sort of software that pushes your third party sales directly into your POS system is a great way to reduce the labor hours, because, as you typically getting your third party orders at your peak times. And so is somebody standing there looking at the tablet on the wall and then looking at the POS system and typing it all in, or is it just kind of automatically flowing through your system? And so now is the time to kind of evaluate that as well, because if you do have heavy volume on your third party websites, then you're going to save a ton of time by not having to hand key it in at the store level. And with that, I think we're ready for questions. Or Rick, do you want to lead that side of the
Sure. There's an option to type in questions, so I'm sure we've got a few there already. Let's see. First question is there any way to attack the tip credit? So, this is somebody who's got servers making $18 to $30 per hour right now with tipped wages. And that includes the current paid wages. So the biggest concern the operator has is the tip credit. And I think we all share in that. Thoughts on that, Bryce and Dave?
Well, I think state to state, it's obviously a different answer, whether you're in a state like Florida with an amendment process that you could change the law, but unfortunately all states aren't built that way. And I think it's an uphill battle unless you get a lot of people behind a movement. I'll tell you that when the minimum wage in Florida went up years ago, I was part of a committee that Dan Murphy put me on, and Darden, Outback, the group that I was with then, Miller's Ale House, we all kind of teamed together and put money into a pot to try to understand what can we do to educate the consumer, especially when it comes to the tip credit. And unfortunately, in interviewing lots of citizens about trying to educate them, the average citizen did not care to engage, educate themselves, or hear what the hell a tip credit even meant. And so it's an uphill battle. What I would say is, if your state has it, just fight like hell to keep it.
Yeah, and along those lines too, I think from a number standpoint, with the current law, I don't know if there's a way around it outside of looking at, automating or, being able to kind of better measure your labor, your front of house labor, and figuring out where you can best cut. That's kind of the biggest strategy there. And it's kind of interesting, when it happened in California, there are a lot of brands that actually shifted to more of like a Chipotle kind of model, where you go up and order as opposed to getting the service and they bring it out to you. So I won't venture as far to say that you might have to reinvent certain things at the restaurant, but that's probably a consideration, because the front of house just effectively they're doubling in wages now.
All right, so Dave, so there's zero tip credit in California, is that right?
Yeah.
And that's for what it's worth, that's what we're faced with at the federal level too, from the people I've talked to recently. And Dan Murphy, you might jump in on that, but definitely if a federal minimum of 15 goes through as it currently stands, there's not a lot of thought to having a tip credit. So I mean, that's clearly a battle that's going to come, and probably come very soon, even though it's been pulled out of the current recovery relief package that Biden's proposing. He's abandoned that for now, but you can bet that it's coming back soon. Another question is, excuse me. So what's FRLA doing in Florida for the bigger tip credit? Dan, that's what's the question.
I'm having audio breaking. Sorry, I was muted. Hey, Chris, we'll handle that. I'll have Richard send you some information on that.
And the question is there a way to consider benefits paid by the company, such as health insurance, as wages earned or part of the wage? Either, Bryce?
Yeah, I currently no. It's pretty, their wage is their wage. There's no kind of way to, increase it or, add layers of costs on top of that. You're just going to have to take that tip credit or that tipped wage up, to that $6.98.
Next question is there a comprehensive list of things that will go up as a result of the minimum wage? Obviously the labor, but attached to that comes, things like royalties, advertising, workers' comp, unemployment, et cetera.
Yeah, so obviously, workers' comp's going to go up, but Florida thankfully is pretty low on the workers' comp side. In California, it's pretty common to have workers' comp at a restaurant level be 6%, 5 to 6% of wages. Florida, we see more of 1 to 3%. So if your wages are going to go up 30%, then you might as well add an extra 2 to 3% on top of that for workers' comp, and then just various kind of insurances as well, since the wages kind of drive everything. Kind of along those lines too, something interesting that we've seen is, as we talked about earlier, you can only take so much price before the consumer starts reacting. And so there are a lot of, restaurant groups in Florida or in California and in Arizona that we've dealt with where, maybe before the wage increases, they were maybe a 30% food cost, a 30% labor cost. And now because of some price increases, they're 35 to 40% labor and 20 to 25% food costs. So it kind of changes your model up a little bit. If you've always been hey, let's stick 30% food costs, 30% labor. Now labor is going to become more of a a driver in your business, and as a result, with price increases, your food costs might drop. So the metrics that you measure your business by are definitely going to change.
Rick, I was going to say another thing that a lot of independent studies, including government studies, something else that in most cases goes up with the minimum wage is unemployment. It's not a theory. You Google it. Congressional budgets. There was a hike around the $10 mark a couple of years ago, which they tracked, created 500,000 people to become unemployed.
Are you guys aware of any companies out in California that have had to really trim back their benefits packages as a result of as one of the areas they've had to cut because of the wage?
Well, driving around Los Angeles, the biggest cutback that I see is they're shut down. There are so many businesses on Sunset Boulevard, Santa Monica Boulevard that are boarded up. So that's the cutback that I see. As far as the B word goes, as I think most people on this call probably know, the state of California is rich in benefit. So I think that there are things that legally in California you can't cut back, and their hands are tied. I think the larger issue is, for restaurants in California, is that the only thing that we've got is third party, and again, just got patios. Well, the nights here are now in the 40s. They lied to me and said it would never get cold here. So the benefit part, for the most part, I don't think you have the ability to change much. But what you definitely see is the big change is people are shutting down.
Question came in about DOL's got some new guidelines around tip sharing. Is there any creative ways that people might be able to look at tip sharing as a way to get around the higher tipped wage as well as the higher minimum? I know that Danny Meyer tried a lot of things in Union Square Hospitality Group that was pretty well documented in the industry press around tip sharing, and he really tried to get out in front of this and do it, and they've had to reverse course. Now I don't know if he'll go back to that with the new world reality, but I guess the question is just have you heard either of you heard anything creative on what people are doing around tip sharing?
Hey, Rick, this is Dan. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a webinar with Kevin Johnson Jackson not too long ago, especially on the 80-20 rule. I would definitely go to our website and download that. Anything to do with tip sharing right now. I know Kevin's is listening to this webinar, but I would highly recommend contacting your labor attorney before doing any of that type of stuff. It's really dicey right now.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a saying that I subscribe to, and that is tip share is the kryptonite of our business. It'll kill Superman, it'll kill you. I mean, you got to be really, really careful when it comes to getting involved at all with tips.
And Dave, we'll when we send out the recap, we'll send that link to that webinar as well. I encourage people to listen to it. Dave, we got a question for you too. I noticed in Florida, some of our folks that are opening up new restaurants, believe it or not, are having problem hiring folks. Are you experiencing that, or excuse me, hiring employees? Are you experiencing that in California at all?
I have kind of a mixed answer on that. On March 14th, according to the California Restaurant Association, there were 1.2 million people employed in the county I'm in, LA County, employed in restaurants. Today, there are currently 200,000. that are employed. So that tells you I've got 1 million people out there that a year ago had jobs in restaurants looking for jobs, right? So the natural answer is yes, that it's fertile. I feel obligated to say, though, that as we have gone through the pandemic and had employees exposed, had employees test positive, and trying to juggle that with the skeleton staff that we have, and being in a state that allows paid medical leave, something that was attempted in Florida years ago. It's a very difficult thing, and especially with pretty good compensation for unemployment. So I'm going to answer by saying the people are out there. It's their desire to come back to work versus if they're comfortable at home receiving unemployment and support. That's where the juggle is.
I'd say just to add in, anecdotally, we've seen a lot of we've got a lot of clients that have seen a tougher time getting people back, and some people have left our industry and gone to grocery stores or other types of businesses and will never come back. And so, you know, I think it's an ongoing challenge. Dan, did you want to take Kevin Johnson's comment here, or do you want? I'll just read it out, but this is just a piggyback on the tip sharing question. But Kevin Johnson, who's obviously a prominent labor attorney, has a webinar on this that you can listen to. But he says the new tip share regulation is under attack in the courts, and it's very an effective date has also been pushed back by DOL. So it's like a day-to-day. It's up in the air whether it will even survive. So, but again, I think the main point that everybody made was proceed with caution, as Dave said.
Thank you, Rick.
We're out of questions on the screen. Oh no, there's a couple more coming in. What about so again, this is what Danny Meyer's group I think tried to do, but somebody's asking the question, what's your thoughts on going to just a service charge as opposed to tips? And then we become just like Europe, you know, with indifferent service. Anyway, Dave or Bryce, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my thought is that, you know, they don't get much smarter or better than Mr. Danny Meyer. And, you know, he did the great experiment. And last time I checked, it didn't really work out. And that was in not Shake Shack, that was in, you know, higher end dining. I think that, you know, it's going to be really difficult in a country that is so used to gratuity being part of this process. I personally don't see that working.
The question is for either of you, what this person asks, is it better for us in the end since so many states and we're going to end up with this patchwork of states with $15? Is it better off we just get over with and do the national federal minimum of 15? Any opinions on that? I know what your opinion is, Dave, but no, but I want to hear it.
Rip the Band-Aid off, huh?
Yeah, you know, I think it's kind of interesting though. You know, you could do that, but I think I'm more of the, you know, let states deal with it as they want, because you know you're going to get the price increases, right? So it's just a matter of how fast, you know, the price increases hit. So in certain states, you know, they're nowhere near this in terms of prices. You know, one thing that I like to do is a couple of our concepts, you know, that are similar to Florida concepts. I will look at the menu prices and for the same sort of products, you know, like you know, comparing a Mongolian beef to a Mongolian beef, and you know what you see in LA is, you know, it's $15 in LA and it's $10 here. And so, you know, I don't know that all states are ready for everybody to, and $15 is bad. Let's just say $16 and $11. So I don't know if everybody's ready for you know, a $16 Mongolian beef, but that's effectively what's going to happen when that minimum wage goes up, because restaurants are going to be forced to take price. So, you know, I guess we could rip the Band-Aid off, but then, you know, I think prices are going to just gradually go up, right? And I see the point of being at a competitive disadvantage. I think we'll, you know, potentially get to that point when the minimum wage hikes start to be enacted, where, you know, it's a little more expensive to do business in Florida. But, you know, as far as, you know, subjecting the whole country to it, I'm not sure yet. I mean, I kind of go back and forth on that.
We had a question on, you know, if you had a service charge and you went to a commission model where, you know, I guess you'd assume that there is some sort of way to track server performance. And, you know, through, you know, immediate at the table, you know, guest sat or after the fact. But having a performance-based, you know, different levels of servers getting different comp depending on their performance. Anybody heard any examples of that, or have any thoughts on that?
I haven't seen that.
How about differences between QSR and full serve? Have we seen much difference on the impact in California and other places from the 15 minimum?
Can you hear me okay? I lost my volume there.
Yes.
You know, I think that this whole business of minimum wage is, you know, combined with COVID, is going to ramp up fast casual. You know, there was a change just last week, 220 units. I won't name them to protect the innocent, but they basically did a complete reversal, national chain, where the CEO had gone on record back in like October, not that long ago, saying, "Hey, we're going to stay full service, and that's who we are, et cetera." And just this week announced, no, we're going to go fast casual. I think that, you know, if you take the minimum wage issue and you're trying to find the pennies to survive, and you can find something tech related, you know, I'm reminded of a fishing trip that my friend Chris Frawley and I went on, and we visited Alaska. And at the end of it, we were in the Trident factory, and at the end of the tour, it's a phenomenal tour, watching salmon, you know, being cut by hand, you know, these blades. But the guy at the end said, "Hey, I want you to meet our newest employee." And Chris and I, you know, were finishing this tour, and it was where all the salmon was just boxed and being shrink wrapped and put on these flats, and it was a robot. It was a really big robot, and I don't remember the robot's name. But you know, they were talking about financially what that would mean to the company, how many people that robot replaced, right? So silly story, but the point being is that, you know, $15 an hour, $16 an hour, $17 an hour, you know, there's a point where I think restaurants are going to look really hard at service. And again, combine that with COVID. I mean, I can say here in California, what we're discussing is when we get dine-in back, when Governor Newsom allows us to, how will the customer be? Will they be scared? Will they want a server next to their table? We, of course, like most of you, have QR codes and all the touchless opportunities that we can. But I'm saying, you know, unlike, you know, you Florida hellraisers, you know, who just said, I love Governor DeSantis, by the way. You know, hell, we're opening everything up. You know, California is really slow moving. See, California is really, if I may, afraid. And so, you know, we're having to really consider like what that service element is going to be like. And today, I would say to you that I think the average consumer probably is going to want more of a fast casual experience than a whole, 7-step server experience. I could be wrong, but we'll see.
Well, just a quick little add-on from the guy you mentioned, Chris Ferrari. The robot's name was Charlie, and Charlie never calls out sick for work.
That's right.
Charlie never you don't have to pay him for a vacation, never has sick days, and never gets paid overtime.
Yeah,
and
no Title VII violation.
Doesn't have to worry about a tip credit. So just FYI. But I think we're out of questions here. Dan, do you have any other questions that we haven't hit, or should we look to wrap up?
I think Kathy has a question for you, Rick, down at the bottom. Is no tip credit states, is anyone seeing no tipping please message on the menu? Have you seen that, Dave or Bryce? Rick?
No, not really.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I have seen a couple places where they have kind of the auto gratuity, like, hey, we're going to add like a 10%, charge, but that's more of at some finer dining places. But yeah, one thing along those lines too is we noticed the pivot. Some groups that where the menu might be conducive to switching to a fast casual sort of model where you go order first and then they bring the food out to you. We noticed a lot of switches to that. And as a result, the tipping kind of goes away at that point because you're not necessarily tipping the busser who's taking your food out to you. So that was a lot of, kind of regional change in California sort of shifted to that model as opposed to having a server come take your order. And as a result, that kind of, in a way got rid of the tipping anyway. I'm not saying that happened across the board, but that's just something that we did see where some restaurants where it was easy for them to have people come up and order from the menu chose to do that, and then there was no tipping option there.
There is a question about whether, and I guess this really goes to you, Dan, more than anyone, whether we're going to offer anything along these lines, on this subject. That's tailored specifically for the lodging side. And I mean, I would say that most of the stuff we've talked about is applicable, but for something more specific, toward a webinar towards just the lodging side, I don't know if Dan, you want to take that.
No, we would be glad to look at it. And Valerie, if you want to send me an email or Ashley an email.
So here's a good question, and for either you, Bryce, or Dave, what do you think the impact up the scale is, right? If we go to minimum at 15, then how much are we going to be paying dishwashers? How much are we going to be paying line cooks? How much, I know there's a range, but I mean, it's a good point. I'll start by saying that historically in the industry, there's always, the whole scale goes up. Once the minimums, the starter wage and the rest of, if you're paying your brand new employees that are being trained 15, then you're going to have to be bumping all the stuff above that, and so Dave, Bryce, you want to add anything on that? Just the pressure on the overall wage scale for all the other positions.
Yeah, I can definitely add to that. So I'll kind of go from the experience of Los Angeles being, I believe it's, $13.50 right now because they decided they'd go 50 cents higher faster than the state of California. And right there, you're paying your more skilled positions, like your cooks, like $17, $18 an hour and going up from there. So, I'd say as we get to 15, I think that your kind of core line cooks are going to be looking at 20. And that obviously in some markets is easier to get people than others. So, that could vary a little bit, but in a little bit of a competitive market, we're looking at, $4 to $5 above minimum wage. And I don't remember what Chin Chin is paying, but I think it's probably in a similar wage range, to get kind of your day-to-day mainline line cooks. So yeah, to your point, Rick, everything's going to kind of go up across the board and pro rata, and then also your manager wages are going to go up too as a result.
No doubt about it. If nothing else, minimum wage sets the bar, right? It sets the bar of the entry-level individual. In my case, I started as a dishwasher. So I walk in to bust some suds at $15 an hour. To Bryce's point, the average cook for us out here right now is probably in the neighborhood of around 19. If you work a wok, you're probably at 22. There are other positions than that fiery wok cooking. Yeah, I mean, the boats will rise with the tide of minimum wage, let there be no doubt.
I think we're out of questions. Ashley, did you want to wrap up?
Yes, thank you, Rick, Bryce, Dave. We appreciate your time today. And, sorry for a little bit of the technical difficulties with some audio. I think we got it fixed right there at the end. I will send out, everyone's information and the video recording of this webinar with some of the resources that we discussed. And like I said, we appreciate everyone's time and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.